So I did another essay on chat using the AI. Has to do with American freedom, right? Its biblical roots or so. These are some of the things that goes over some of these things. Like it says, I told it like I created it because I see a moral and identity crisis in America or so, right? And it says that your essay isn't just an academic exercise. It's a response to the identity crisis and moral fragmentation in America today. So it says how it speaks to it, moral foundations, and I also gave it some more books, right, that I think relate to the topic. And I went and like read through like some of the chapters and see which ones are relevant, right? So I'm trying to accurately integrate it into the essay, right? So I am pretty sure it's accurate as far as the AI citing it. I did double check, but if for any reason it's not, then I apologize, right? If it's an accurate citation or so, which it shouldn't be. But anyway, Schneidau and Glover are two authors, right, who wrote on the subject. They show that Western morality, including the sense of civic virtue and conscience, originates in biblical principles. And today, when moral relativism and secular individualism dominate, Americans often lose the ethical grounding that shaped the nation's founders. 2, civic identity goes over the Puritan covenant. The author is McKenna. Then the other author is Bercovitch. They explained that America's sense of itself as a new Israel wasn't symbolic. It shaped laws, institution, and culture. Because I believe that is also important when it comes to the American Christian nation that is tied into its identity, its reality, right? Because American religion, like I said, it's not generic religion. It's rooted in biblical religion. And so American religion is biblical religion. It's tied to the tradition of like the Hebrews, Old Testament, New Testament, covenant God, etc. Covenant, civic order, right? Compact, contract, kind of things, right? So it's not just generically religious. And so ignoring this heritage, as this says, contributes to fragmented national identity and moral drift, that people no longer see freedom as tied to virtue or responsibility. And 3, secular challenges. These two authors, Louis and Schneidau, that I used right in their books, they show that secular humanism and moral pluralism cannot alone sustain civic virtue. Without acknowledgement of transcendent standards, liberties risk being exercised without moral constraint, which manifests today in social unrest, cultural polarization, and ethical confusion. 4, relevance of the essay. By tracing the historical, theological roots of freedom, your essay points to a solution, reclaiming the moral and spiritual foundations that made liberty meaningful. It isn't nostalgia, it's practical wisdom. If America forgets its covenantal roots, freedom and virtue are weakened. If it remembers and lives by them, civic cohesion, moral clarity, and national identity are restored, right? Basically, remember the God of your country, right? Woe to the nation who forgets, their Lord or whatever, right? And also, I would agree. It's like, because I was saying that what America needs is to understand itself, right? Like, its values. What does this thing say? I remember, because I agree with it. I thought about it at first, and I was like, I would agree. It's about, America needs religion, but no, America really needs is her Christian presuppositions, right? Her remembrance, right? Where it's rooted from, the ideas of liberty, right? From its religious consciousness, so to say. And then it says that, it isn't nostalgia, it's practical wisdom. If America forgets its covenantal roots, freedom and virtue become weakened, right? I read that already, okay? And So your essay is not just historical or theological, it's diagnostic and prescriptive for contemporary America, basically. This is what I called it, the American Covenant and the Biblical Roots of Freedom. I think the idea of American Covenant captures the biblical and imagination, and the biblical and American imagination. So it's hard to say. It's the American religion, basically. And then introduction, right? Start off with introduction. It says, every civilization lives upon a faith, spoken or unspoken, confessed or forgotten. The modern West, and America most of all, was founded upon the solemn conviction that liberty is not self-originating but flows from divine truth. Yet the secular mind of our age dares to believe that Christ and the sacred revelation of Scripture itself can be supplanted by reason and by progress or by politics. History resounds with a contrary testimony, from the prophets of Israel to the Puritan founders, from Augustine's towering theology to the covenant that birthed the nation. Every moral and intellectual root of freedom springs from the hallowed soil of the Bible. When that faith is severed, freedom withers. When it flourishes, the nation rises with virtue as its armor. The moral foundations of liberty and the failure of secular autonomy. Guenter Lewy, in Why America Needs a Religion, exposes with piercing clarity the moral void that secular humanism leaves in its wake. In the modern age, ethics untethered from faith become a shadow of justice, a mockery of virtue. Acts once condemned as vicious or self-destructive are now heralded as exercises of personal rights. In this inversion, quote, doing right, end quote, has been subordinated to, quote, claiming rights, end quote. The secular humanist seeking to unchain mankind from the, quote, encrusted moral beliefs of the past, end quote, proclaims tolerance as ultimate liberation, yet delivers only fragmentation, moral confusion, and societal drift. Even the founders discerned this peril. George Washington wrote in his farewell address, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. Cecil Laborde, in Liberalism's Religion, reveals that modern liberalism itself has become a moral creed enshrining autonomy and equality as quasi-sacred values. Liberalism, she shows, depends upon a moral anthropology inherited from Christianity, a belief in conscience and inner worth, but detaches these ideals from their divine source. In doing so, it becomes a rival faith, sacralizing the self while denying the transcendent order that made the self sacred. J. Judd Owen, in Religion and the Demise of Liberal Rationalism, traces the collapse of Enlightenment confidence in pure reason. Once revelation was dismissed, reason itself lost its authority. Having displaced God, liberal rationalism inherited no transcendent foundation for moral obligation. Modern thought, Owen concludes, oscillates between skepticism and moral arbitrariness. Together, these thinkers expose the same paradox. The secular West draws moral energy from the biblical vision it repudiates. It seeks the fruits of faith while cutting down the tree that bore them. The founders knew what modern man has forgotten. Liberty requires spiritual restraint, and national morality cannot live without religious principle. The Puritan covenant and the birth of the American self. Against this modern moral exhaustion stands the original American faith. The Puritan covenantal vision, as George McKenna shows in The Puritan Origins of American Patriotism. The Puritans saw themselves as heirs of Israel, a new Israel chosen and planted in the wilderness. To fulfill a divine errand, America for them was not a mere political experiment, but a providential mission. McKenna distills their inheritance into 5 defining convictions. 1. America as New Israel, a nation called out of bondage, guided by God, charged to be an example to the nations. 2. Activist Christianity, faith not as contemplation, but as commission to build a just commonwealth, says on earth as it is in heaven. Covenant theology, the belief that national prosperity depends on fidelity to God's word. 4. The war against the Antichrist, recognition that evil operates in history and that faith may demand struggle. 5. Anxious introspection, the conviction that sin within the soul threatens the health of the commonwealth. There is no purely private sin. This moral architecture shaped America's conscience for generations. Even Jefferson, in his second inaugural, echoed the Puritan typology when he invoked, quote, that almighty being who led our fathers as Israel of old from their native land, end quote, as McKenna and Bercovitch both show that the American self was born from the union of covenantal faith and civic destiny. Bercovitch, in the Puritan Origins of the American Self, reveals that the Puritan did not see himself as an autonomous individual, but as a moral participant in God's redemptive history. His inner life was not private, but vocational. His conscience was a site of divine purpose. This inward covenant produced a freedom unlike any the world had known. Freedom through obedience, individuality through calling. From this synthesis emerged the American self, a person whose identity was inseparable from both conscience and community. Thus the Puritan covenant gave birth to a moral nation. It bound freedom to virtue, liberty to faith, and national destiny to divine judgment. When this covenantal vision faded, America retained its vocabulary of freedom but lost its theological grammar. The prophetic inheritance and the renewal of history. The Puritan covenant was itself the continuation of a grander inheritance, the prophetic vision of Israel. Herbert and Schneidau in Sacred Discontent, the Bible and Western tradition, illuminates how the Hebrew prophets shattered complacency and myth, creating the first moral history, a history measured not by conquest or wealth, but by righteousness. They forced a vision of human destiny that dared to confront sin, both communal and personal, and to demand accountability to a God whose justice is inescapable. Yet Schneidau warns that modern secular culture has tried to inherit the prophets' courage without their faith. Secular humanism borrows the Bible's demythologizing power, but rejects its spiritual burden, turning prophecy into ideology. From counterculture, romanticism to political revolutionism, the modern world imitates biblical moral energy while draining it of transcendence. In this mimicry, Schneidau sees the bankruptcy of the secular humanist tradition. William B. Glover in Biblical Origins of Modern Secular Culture complements this revelation by tracing Christianity's transformative virtues, faith, hope, and charity, that lifted moral life beyond the Stoic and Roman horizon. Faith steadies the soul in the storm of history. Hope dares to glimpse the eternal beyond temporal suffering. Charity binds human hearts to divine love. Christianity did not merely add a new virtue, it transfigured the moral imagination of the world. Through these virtues, Christianity transformed the meaning of ethical life. The highest good was no longer the Stoic sages' independence or citizens' honor, but humility, service, and obedience to God's moral law. Glover argues that this theological revolution laid the foundations of Western ideals of human dignity, compassion, and social responsibility. Even modern secular humanism, he observes, unconsciously borrows from this Christian inheritance while detaching it from its transcendent source. An echo of Schneidau's claim that secular culture appropriated the biblical or the Bible's demythologizing powers without assuming its moral burdens. Together, Schneidau and Glover reveal the paradox of Western culture. The very ideas that sustain our moral and historical imagination, progress, reform, conscience, are biblical in origin. Secular modernity has not escaped the Bible. It merely speaks its language in exile, often lacking the roots that make it morally coherent. And in the conclusion, the irreplaceable word. Across every age, one immutable truth endures. No civilization thrives without remembering the word that sustains it. From the prophets of Israel to the founders of America, freedom has always presupposed a divine lawgiver. When men forget that word, eloquence becomes hollow, ideals lose their compass, and liberty decays into appetite. Louis discerned the symptom, a culture that prizes rights above righteousness. Laborde and Owen traced the malady, a civilization that sacralizes the self while denying its creator. Schneidau and Glover revealed the genealogy of this malaise, a secular age nourished on the moral capital of revelation, yet estranged from its life-giving source. Puritans, however, knew the cure. Liberty bound to virtue, faith entwined with civic duty, conscience disciplined by covenant. The modern West has not lost religion, it has lost remembrance. Its moral language, its sense of destiny, its very conception of human dignity are echoes of a once living faith. To reject the author is to wander in a desert of borrowed words. To return to him is to restore both freedom and conscience. Every civilization and every soul lives not by mere inheritance, but by the living light of truth. The prophets shattered idols to reveal God. We must shatter the idol of our autonomy to behold Christ alone, the eternal measure of man, of history, and of liberty itself. Yeah, because this part I remember, because I'm constantly running into, secularists, and they're always emphasizing that we don't need Christianity, we don't need, Christ or God, right? And they're always trying to, they're hell-bent on trying to find a suitable substitution. But that's what I say when it comes to secular values or liberal values. As a Christian, I don't need a substitution. I already have what is needed, which is Christ and the God of Christ. And for Christians, there is no substitution. There is no substitution for Christ. That's why I don't entertain the secular ideology, because it's also what it is, right? It becomes a type of ideology. And then I have this other part I added. Scholarly caveats and anticipated critiques, right? It says, while this essay demonstrates the foundational role of biblical and Christian thought in shaping Western freedom, it is important to recognize that Western civilization is a complex tapestry of influences. Critics rightly note that Greco-Roman philosophy, Roman law, natural law traditions, and indigenous culture practices contributed to the moral and political development. The essay does not deny these influences. Rather, it emphasizes that biblical and Christian frameworks provided the moral coherence and transcendent or orientation that these other sources lacked. So I may argue that the causal chain connecting biblical revelation to modern civic virtue overstates Christianity's role. It is more accurate to say that the Bible and Christian theology laid the conceptual and moral groundwork upon which later intellectual, cultural, and political developments were built, including Enlightenment ideas, historical scholarship, and secular social theory. Empirical critiques point to highly secular societies such as Scandinavian nations, which maintain strong social cohesion and civic virtue. While true, these societies often inherit residual moral norms rooted in Christian culture, and their long-term stability depends on institutions' homogeneity and cultural memory shaped by religiously informed ethics. Secular virtue without this heritage is historically fragile. The internal failings of Christianity, including hypocrisy, brutality, and moral lapses, are also acknowledged. However, the moral framework and self-critical mechanisms embedded in prophecy, covenantal thought, and theological virtues provide corrective tools absent in purely secular ideologies. The ideal, not the imperfect, practice sustains civilization. Finally, liberal secularism's merits pluralism, protection of dissent, and the emphasis on individual liberty are real. Yet, as Louis and Laborde note, liberalism alone struggles to provide moral authority for discerning right and wrong beyond social convention. Christianity contributes not just guidance, but a vocabulary and framework for ethical obligation, grounding, liberty, and virtue and conscience. And so that's pretty much the essay. So if you like it, please like and subscribe. Thank you, and God bless.